Hi, this is Dan Korver, pastor here at Dalton Hill Baptist Church. We're a small Baptist church located in Owasso, Oklahoma. We're small enough to know you, but we're big enough to serve you and for you to serve as well. Our vision is to rescue, restore, and return to service. Rescue a non-believer or a believer who has been hurt or is lost, restoring them to Christ in fellowship with other believers with the desire that they in turn will help others along their way.
We've been going through a brief series just on the signs of life. Obviously, if a believer, we are a follower of Christ, we should be showing signs of that. And so you have different ones we're going through today. I'm going to look a little bit at the potter and the painter, if you wanted the title. Everyone is known for something. Would you agree with that? Everyone is known for something. I'll give you a description of three famous painters, and you tell me if you think you know who they are. First one, I think you'll get this one. The greatest artist of the Dutch school, painted with lush, rich colors, a master of light, shadows, and human emotions. Painted portraits as well as scenes from Amsterdam and the Bible. Supper, Emmaus, the return of the prodigal son. Who did that? Nope. Close. Rembrandt. That's why I said there's a debate. Some would say Rembrandt, some would say Van Gogh. If you just were in town, you might have seen the Rembrandt collection we just got through having down there. Here's another one. Modern Spanish artist, founded of Cubism, painter, drawer, sculpture, famous for caricatures and abstracts as well as realistic paintings, considered a rebel in the art world. I look at his stuff and I don't care for it at all, but he is very, very well known. Picasso. I mean, you look at some of that stuff and people made millions for it, but I'd rather not have it in my house. Here's another one, often called the painter of light. Died a couple of years ago. Contemporary artist who paints idealistic scenes of villages, cottages, churches, lighthouses, landscapes. Evokes the feeling of warmth and solitude, noted for his light, his reflector of values. Thomas Kincaid. Yeah, remember that?
We all know that one.
Okay. Man, that's not bad. No. Today you would have passed. You got one right, you know.
Get a trophy.
But you stop and you think about it, each one of us is noted for something. You ever wonder what would happen if we went to 5 of the closest people and asked them to write a description of you, what they would write down? That's an interesting question. What you would want them to write down, and what would they write down, and then well, it could be two different things, and what would it take for us to get there? So what they do write down is what we want them to write down. It'd have to be a change. Let's think about, first of all, when you look at it, first of all, when you look at the potter, and we've been through some of this before, so we won't repeat it, but if you remember in Psalms 139, in verse 13 to 16, it says that the Father formed you in your mother's womb, and your days are numbered before you ever had one. So you are formed. And I think a lot of us have been upset much of our life the way He formed you. He didn't give you the intellect you wanted. He didn't give you the height you wanted. He didn't give you whatever you fill in the blank. But He is the potter, and He used obviously the gene chromosomes and stuff of our parents, but needless to say, He has designed it. And how many of us are working with the potter? I think it's important. It's interesting in the same passage. In verse 23 and 24, then David answers the question, or asks the question, search me, O God, and what? Know my heart. Try me and see if there's any wicked way in me. How many of you are turning to the Father and say, hey, you know everything about me. Search me, and anything you find, let me know and I'll correct it. How many of us are making that prayer? That's a good question to ask. I think a lot of times we look at other people or whatever it might be. So we have the formed part, and I think we need to be asking ourselves, how many of us are asking God, look at my attitude, look at my actions, Does attitude ever get any of us in trouble? Just a little bit? Well, what about reform? Look over in Jeremiah 18. This is one you stop and think about. What about reform? Obviously created in God's image, and all of us, we have a sin nature, which, by the way, I need to make one announcement. We had Dakota this past week on the little car he was driving in the back seat, wanted to know how to come to know Christ. This past week, he was led to Christ, recognized that he was a sinner, and recognized Jesus died for his sins, and asked Jesus into his heart. So you think about it, in the last year, we've had 3 young men of this church that's come to know Christ. And the reason I'm bringing that up is why it is so important, too, for Sunday school and children's church while we have it. So I commend everyone for that. So, but this being encouraging him, and as soon as he saw me this morning, he came running down the deal, and he came running up to me, and he wanted to tell me about it. So that was neat to see. He wasn't coerced. He did it on his own. All right, notice on the reform, notice in Jeremiah 18, and Jeremiah is told to go down to the potter's house and to watch, and notice he's there and he's watching in verse 3. Then in verse 4, the vessel that he was making of clay was spoiled in the hands of the potter, so he remade it into another vessel as it pleased the potter to make. If you ever watch somebody doing that, they'll all of a sudden come up with something in the clay that they didn't see before, so they have to make some changes or whatever it might be. Notice that he makes this analogy. Then the Lord speaks to Jeremiah in verse 6. Can I not, O house of Israel, deal with you as the potter does, declares the Lord? Behold, like the clay in the potter's hands, so are you in my hands, O house of Israel. In one moment I may speak concerning a nation or concerning a kingdom to uproot, to pull down, or destroy. If that nation against which I have spoken turns from its evil way, I'll relent concerning the calamity I plan to bring on it. Notice the reform. If the nation will make a change, God will do something different. Same thing happened with Nineveh, you remember? What about you and I? We're made out of clay, but when we mess up, you have the same thing. You'll be disciplined. There'll be different things that can happen, but how many of us are willing to then make changes? Or we're going to be like Israel here, that basically they won't turn away. They won't change. Have you ever made the statement, that's just the way I am? We can make changes. It's not necessarily easy, but we can. We're in the potter's hands. So notice he formed us, but he also is willing to reform us. Obviously starting with the death of Jesus Christ as our Savior. But will I recognize my errors and make changes? Usually we look at other people, and I'm better than them, or whatever it might be. I meant to bring a piece of pottery that I was given when I taught school. I thought of this, it was 45 years ago. They didn't have much money at the Christian school I was at. So we were Eastwood Knights. Bob will probably remember it. So Mrs. Quinton and Anita Robards had a kilns, and so for gifts, they poured it in, and then they painted it and glazed it, and fired it, and all that stuff. And so you have the Knights for Christ, and on there it says Coach Dan Korver. That was in 1983. So it's been a few years. I'd even forgotten I'd had it until I saw it yesterday. So you never know. But notice those people had something in mind they were wanting to make. Does the Lord have something in mind He wants to make? And how many of us are willing to be molded into that? So think about it. You have formed and you have reformed. What about in Romans chapter 9? Romans chapter 9, I think a lot of us like do this replacing part. He formed us, He reformed us, but I think a lot of us are doing the replacing. Romans chapter 9, 9 to 11 is talking about the sovereignty of God. But notice in verse 20 of chapter 9 of Romans, on the contrary, you, O man, who answers back to God, the thing molded will not say to the molder, why did you make me this like this, will it? Or does the potter have a right over the clay to make from the same lump one vessel for honorable use and another for common use. Replacing. How of us are trying to be the potter, and we're trying to tell the potter what he needs to do in our life and other people's lives, and we're trying to tell him. Any of you ever get caught trying to tell God what he ought to be doing? In our life, somebody else's life, how he needs to open doors, close doors, whatever it might be. And I think it's really, we've got to keep in mind who is the potter and who is the clay. And so we have he formed us, he's reforming us if we'll allow him to. And he's also, we have a tendency to want to replace that position. But when you go back in Romans 8:28, remember it says, all things work together to them that what? Love God, that's a big if, and according to his purpose. I think it's a good reminder, if a person truly is following those two things, God will take circumstances that may be bad, but he can make them work to make us more like Christ, conforming us to the image of his Son. And so I think it's always important to remember he's in charge. Nothing catches him off guard. It may catch us off guard. In fact, that's why he says his ways are not our ways, his thoughts not our thoughts in the book of Isaiah. So it's hard. We keep trying to figure things out. And the older you get, I think you'll realize the more and older you get, the more and more you don't figure it out. Because we're not God. But once you think about the realization, you realize in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, and then we'll look on to some others besides. I want to look at the painter primarily. Look over in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. So you're formed, you're being reformed. We don't want to replace the potter. How many of you want to have somebody else as the potter? Can you imagine what this world would be like if we had a lot of potters trying to replace it? Reminder that all things work together. And then notice in the realization, it's amazing. Using a pottery term again, notice in verse 7 of 2 Corinthians, for we have this treasure in earthly vessels. The treasure is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Surpassing greatness of the power may be of God, not from ourselves. You realize just what God has given us as little clay vessels, a treasure. If you had the cure for cancer and you didn't reveal it to the world, what do you think might happen to you? Would you have any people upset with you? Could you even be brought up on criminal charges? Do we have something greater than a cure for cancer? You have a cure for eternal destiny. We're all going to die. I want us to think about that. We have this treasure. Are we sharing it and giving it out to other people? That's why you think why the potter chose human beings. You ever wonder that? Don't you think about any one of his creation would have done a better job? I mean, a dog's a whole lot more obedient than we as humans are. And I think it's interesting, and I know Katie's over there saying, well, even on my dogs.
You do, though.
Yeah, I do. But I noticed when you said go to the crate, you did.
You did.
When God tells us to go to the crate, what do we do? You know. When we think about that, the reminder, if that's the case, look over at the removal. Look over in 2 Timothy and you look at the context. 2 Timothy chapter 2. So we have the potter part of it. 2 Timothy chapter 2. Paul is writing this just before his death. He's writing to Timothy, a young pastor. And notice what he says in 2 Timothy chapter 2, if you notice, in verse 21. You can go to verse 20. Now in a large house there are not only good gold and silver vessels, but also vessels of wood and earthly ware, some for honor and some for dishonor. How many of you ladies have dishes you use every day. Some of you have dishes you bring out on special occasions. We're going to find that out this afternoon in my house. Ruthie just turned 31. She loves blue, so she's wanting to have everybody get together at the house and asked if Jean would bring out her mother's china that's the right color blue that she likes. So we got to find them and dig them out, you know. So you know where I'll be this afternoon.
In the garage.
Yeah, digging stuff out. But we'll notice the same thing. If that's the case, how do you want to be used for honorable use for God? He's the potter, and you want to be used for honorable use. Notice what does he tell you then in 21? Therefore, if man cleanses himself from these things, he will be a vessel for honor, sanctified, useful for the master, prepared for every good work. Fleeing youthful lust, pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace with those who call on God from a pure heart. How do you want to be a vessel that's used for God's honor? If we do, he's telling you right here what we have to do. Most of us, though, we compare ourselves to other people. We say what? I'm more honorable than they are. But that's not what God said. He said, be ye holy as I am holy. Well, then I got a long way to go. And so I think it's important. He's the potter. He's reforming us. We shouldn't be replacing him. A reminder, all things work together for good. The realization that I have things that I need to tell. I'm an ambassador for him. You have that in chapter 5. And I have to be reconciled. That's a job he's given me. But to be of honor use for him, I then have to remove things out of my life. So I think this will be stopping and you think about it. How do you really want to be used of God? Does Dalton Hill really want to be used of God? If that's the case, we have to be looking at all these, not be comparing to other people, but be comparing ourselves to what God wants.
Be willing to be changed.
What's that?
To be willing to be
Be willing to be changed. And how the older you get, the harder it is to want to change. Very true. I want you to think about now, what about the painter? We have some paintings up here. There's one that Rosemary painted. I'm guessing that's acrylic, is that correct? Okay. Okay. I know you painted it a few years back. I'm assuming that's acrylic. So let me ask you, if you're the painter, there's some questions a painter may ask. What medium are you going to use? Medium meaning acrylic, oil base, watercolor. That's important to know. If you're wanting to have this painting done in a day, you won't use oil base. So it's important to know what medium you're using. What about the surface? Does it matter what surface you're painting on? I see Rosemary going, yes it does. Very important. Is it rigid? Is it wood? Is it metal? Is it canvas? All that makes a difference when you try to decide what you're going to paint. What medium you decide to choose. Let me ask you another. What kind of materials are you going to have? I brought a couple of materials here. I want Rosemary to paint a picture for me. Here you go, Rosemary. Here's your paintbrush and here's your paint. What's so funny? I want you to paint hands with this. Okay. What did I use this paintbrush for?
house.
There you go, the outside of the house. Exactly right. When you got to paint the outside of the house, you're not using a little bitty paintbrush. But if you're painting something small, you might use something like this. Of course, this is for the kids, teaching them. But you stop and you think, well, that's obvious. But how many of us are trying to use the wrong materials to paint what we're doing? Let me ask you another question. Where's the painting going to go? Does that make a difference?
Yes.
If the painting is going outside, how well would this canvas go outside? Not well at all. Because that's part of what's happening to the Sistine Chapel. Moisture's coming through the ceiling. Okay, so it's important to know where we're going to place this painting. when we get inside to paint. Another question, I think if Rosemary was painting, would she want to know how much time do you have? You know, we're commissioning her and I want this painting and I want it in 2 days. You know, it's just amazing when you see that kind of stuff, but it's important for us to ask these questions. You're the painter, remember? We have a potter, but you're the painter. So here's some questions you might ask. Here's some questions a potential client might ask you. May I see your previous work? If I'm going to pay you some money, I'd kind of like to see some of your previous work. Of course, which ones would you send them to? But you'd still want to see them, right? What about what's your estimated time of completion? You remember that's how the arts were done years ago. The patrons, the wealthy, would then commission these people to paint. But if I'm going to have you paint, I would kind of like to know, I really don't want it to be completed in 20 years. Because I probably will pay you and never get to enjoy it. Estimation time of completion is important. Let's give you another question. What's the cost? You may do a fantastic job, but if I don't know the cost, I may not be able to pay it when you get done. A friend of mine at work, his mom is a very well-known painter. Been all over the world and painted a lot of stuff. And I was admiring some of her work, and he sent me to her webpage. She's retired, and you can get the paintings. I'd love to have one, but until I discover some money, there won't be one in my house. Okay? Beautiful paintings. Beautiful paintings. She's been commissioned by the state of Oklahoma and done other stuff all over the world. Beautiful stuff. Let me ask you another question. If I were to ask 5 of your closest friends to give a word picture describing you, what would I get? What would you like it to be? I want to think about it. Okay, so we've had questions for the painter. Now we've had questions for the potential client. I want you all to paint a selfie for me. Y'all ready to paint yourself? Some of you are saying no. I tried, when I was teaching school, I tried to illustrate some stuff. And I worked hard on it. And when the kids started laughing so much, what is he doing? Stabbing somebody with a carrot and all this other stuff? When I had to explain every drawing and none of them could understand it, I realized real quick my chances of doing something like that were not too good. But I want you to think about this. These are some questions I want to ask you. Seriously, I want you to paint yourself. Actual or desired? Does that make a difference? How you actually are or how you would like to be? What about private or public? Are you different in private than you are in public? What about temporal or eternal? That makes a big difference too. How do you want to be viewed in eternity, and how are you viewed today? Now, a lot of people care more about today than they do about eternity. I want you to think about this. So let's look at it. You're the painter. You're going to paint a selfie. Challenge, I want you to do the art of the heart. Let me give you some of them. Here's about 5 or 6. If you would, turn over to Colossians chapter 4. We've seen this a number of times. It's Colossians 4, Ephesians 4. Colossians chapter 4. Notice in verse 6 it says, "But let your speech be seasoned with salt, grace, so that you may know how to respond to each person." So if you're going to paint a selfie, how many of you want to have a mouth on that painting? Okay? What's coming out of the mouth? Is it what you want to have? Or is it a forked tongue? What is it? So you think of words of love. I think it's important. Ephesians 4 and verse 29, remember, it says, "Let no unwholesome," or meaning the word rotten, come out of your mouth. but only those that give grace and mercy to the hearer. So when I'm painting my own self-portrait, obviously I want to have a mouth on. What about besides words of love, what about deeds of love? It can be a lot of things. You remember Jesus 3 different times or 4 times, he looked out on the audience and it said he had compassion. A sheep without a shepherd, so he taught them. He looked out on them and the 5,000 as well as the 4,000. He had compassion because they were going to faint, they hadn't eaten, and he wanted to feed them. He looks out on compassion and he heals them. Doesn't that all relate to his eyes? Doesn't relate to his hands? So if I want to have hands on my painting, is it hands that are giving or hands that are taking and closed up? Do I want to have eyes that look out on other people and help? Or are my eyes only centered on myself? So remember, we're going to do this selfie. It's pretty obvious we can do it, but what are we going to include in it if we're going to do it correctly? You stop and you think about it. Romans 5 verse 8, remember, it says God demonstrated his love toward us, and while we were yet sinners, Christ did what? Deed of love. He came down here. What about thoughts of love? How do you want to have we want to have a mind, don't we, on our painting? You stop and you think of Psalms 19 verse 14. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be what? Acceptable in thy heart. Think about it. What about our mind? We're painting our own self-portrait. We need to have a mind. Well, then God has to have control of our mind. That's what we have in Romans chapter 8. We're talking about whoever controls the mind controls everything. If you don't believe it, look at all the advertising on TV. Why is the advertisement on TV no longer geared to our age? Because that's not where the money and stuff's being spent. It's geared to the younger people. We were there one time. Now we're, obviously they don't care very much about us. They're going after a different audience, trying to get control of that mind. Why do you have all your different parades, your parade of homes? Because they're trying to make you dissatisfied with what? What you have, so you'll get what they have to offer, whatever it might be. So you think about it. So you have the words of love, the mouth, you have the deeds of love, the hands, the feet, the eyes, the thoughts of love, talking about the head. What about the heart, the gifts of love? John 3:16. For God so loved the world, he what? He gave. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 16. If you see a brother in need and you have means to meet it and you close up your heart to him, how can the love of God abide in you? Okay, how many of us have this gift of love? How do you know if somebody loves you? Because of what they say or because of what they do? So I think it's important for us to look at it, our actions, not just once, not just twice, but over and over again. Show the love. What about your body? What about steps of love? What did God give up? Didn't Jesus give up heaven to come to this earth to die for us? You stop and you think about it. Philippians 2, don't think of your own interests, but also the interests of others. Have this mind in you, which is also in Christ Jesus. You go back to then chapter 3, forget what lies behind, I press on to the upward calling of God, verse 14 and 15. How many of us are having steps of love? If I see somebody in need, do I go to them? Do I help them? Or don't I? So how's your painting coming? Kind of smeared? Okay. Well, you think about it. Are we not actually painting a selfie? We are. Do you have hands? Do you have a heart? Do you have eyes, feet, all those things? As an artist, I've been told 2 of the hardest things to paint are faces and hands. For me, I can't even do a stick figure, but I understand. But great artists can do a lot of that. I have one here. This is I have a couple paintings, and obviously you know these aren't mine. I worked for this lady for many, many years. She has dementia, and she's now gone on to Houston. And this is one of them that she did. You know, just watercolors. This one she did here. And what this is, what she did at Ronald McDonald House, artists then were painting pictures, they then sell them, and then the money that it goes to Ronald, this is one of the advertisements. And so Sue Montgomery was one who did these kind of things all the time, a lot of stuff at school, constantly giving of her art, painting for different people, and doing things for people. And so obviously anybody wanted a painting, anything at school, whatever, she donated her time and give the art away and let it be sold for different things. And so I've did her yard for about 40 years, and they moved her family did, going through the stuff, and the daughters invited me in, and the daughter did, and said, is there a couple of these paintings that you think you'd like, or prints that you'd like to take? So that's how I've got it. But think about it, you and I are painting too. There's different mediums we can use. Some may be using it through words. Some may be using it through a brush, watercolor, acrylic, oil. Some can do it through their hands. All the different things they're doing and helping people. It's another thing you have. So I want you to think about it. As you look at your life as a painter, doing a selfie, will you be able to paint a complete, accurate portrait? Head, eyes, ears, arms, hands, legs, feet. Are your hands closed or open? Are you sitting or standing? Are you walking to or away from? All those things show a great deal about you. What do you want it to be? What do you want it to be? So think about it this week. We have a potter who's doing all these things to help us. But as a painter, what are we doing to come up with a portrait we want and be proud of? Obviously, it takes a lot of talent to do something like these paintings. You know they're not mine. I wish I could say they were. They're not. But God can give all of us something to be painting that we can be proud of. So think about it this week.
We'd love for you to come and visit with us and fellowship with us. We're located at 8263 North Owasso Expressway, which is on the east side of Highway 169 North, between 76th and 86th Street North. We have coffee and fellowship from 8:30 to 9 Sundays, followed by Sunday school for all ages from 9 to 9:45, and our Sunday morning worship service is from 10 to 11. We likewise have a Wednesday night service for all ages from 7 to 8. Now may the Lord of peace himself give you peace at all times, and in every way the Lord be with you all the time.